Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to invite you to this European Health Forum Gastein session on the Pharmaceutical Strategy for Europe, building a comprehensive pharmaceutical policy to address today's challenges and tomorrow's realities. My name is Petra Wilson. I'm from Health Connect Partners, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session. We have a great panel for you. But before we go to our panel, I'm going to give you a couple of housekeeping points, and then I'm going to have our opening presentation, which is from Sandra Galina from the European Commission. So let me just first start with the housekeeping questions. You will see on your screens that you have a possibility both for chat and for a Q&A function. The chat function is in case you have any technical issues where you would like to seek help or you would like to have some sort of comment to the organizers. The Q&A function is where you can ask questions, particularly when we go into the presentations of the people who will be making comments and presentations. Within the chat function, you have the possibility to like, just like you might on Facebook, a question. And obviously, the more likes a question gets, the higher it will come up the agenda, and then we'll be sure to ask, and I'll be sure to ask our presenters to address that question. So do make good use of the Q&A section, and do use the like function so we know that what you're really interested in. So without any further discussion, it's my great pleasure to invite Sandra Galina, the Deputy Director-General for DG Sante, I believe as of today. So you're making this, you're in a new position as of today. It's my great pleasure to invite you to set out for us the new pharmaceutical strategy and to kick off our discussion. Sandra, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for this very nice introduction. And I hope somebody is exactly putting a slide on, and, we will be navigating this slide possibly, together. So the first thing I wanted to show to you was a quote from Commissioner Kyriakides. And, the key word of this quote is that Europe needs to have a supply of affordable medicines, So this is the key word on which I would like to somehow center my presence here today. In a sense, we know that we have a lot of competencies, exclusive ones for trade. We have a lot of things that we do as Europe together, united. Let's not use jargon. But when it comes to health, it's very much of a national fragmented picture yet. When you look at the pharmaceuticals and their production, you can imagine that this is at the crossroads of several policies. You have the industrial policy, but you have also trade, and trade in health products in the single market. I would say that in spite of the limited health competencies for the EU, in the recent years, we have had many, many discussions on pharmaceuticals, which have intensified in several institutions, in the European Parliament, in the Council, but also in various fora. And the request for the Commission to act was always there. The most typical requests concerned access, concerned affordability, concerned innovation, security of supply, value chains, and shortages, possibly. The President von der Leyen mandated our Commissioner, Stelios Kyriakides, to take action on pharmaceuticals, and, this first concrete step of the pharmaceutical strategy will be the first visible element, I would say. Now, the strategy does not come, I would say, alone, because there are many things that are happening around the strategy, and this is good that you know. We have, I would say, clearly, the digital agenda that is shaping also health. We have, I would say, other elements which concern the Green Deal. Making Europe climate neutral by 2020 has also, I would say, definitely an element for our own pharmaceutical strategy. The industrial strategy that was published to keep Europe competitive. And, last but not least, the pharmaceutical strategy will be, I would say, clearly connected with all these elements of innovation, of digitalization, and of industrial strategy. So we would like to somehow evaluate our legislation through this proposal, and to make this legislation, as they say today, future-proof and flexible enough so that we can cope with the future challenges. Now, you can see in this slide, which I have put for a longer time, that there are many things that, cross-influence the strategy. We have the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, which is set to reduce the cancer burden for patients and their families. This will be published by the end of this year. We have the coronavirus lessons also that will impact on the pharmaceutical strategy. Horizon Europe is also a major influence because we have, I would say, a dedicated health program within that framework program. We also have, I would say, other elements that are influencing the horizon, and I think we all need to be aware of this. Again, I would like to quote someone, and I would like to quote the President, who in her recent State of the Union speech has put health at the heart of the action of Europe. Unfortunately, it was because of the pandemic that we came to the forefront, but it's very good that the President's State of the Union testifies this need for a stronger European health union for all of us. She laid out plans to strengthen our crisis preparedness and the management of crisis. And she has mentioned several ideas that we could discuss and that are reflected, of course, will be reflected in the pharmaceutical strategy. Now, let me take you a bit into a glimpse of what could the, I would say, pharmaceutical strategy cover in some respects. So we have, of course, the ambition to cover the full life cycle of a medicine. So from scientific discoveries to laboratory and animal testing, to clinical trials, market authorization, technology, health technology assessment, pricing, reimbursement, access, IP protection, manufacturing, up and beyond the entry of generics and biosimilars. So to ensure a future-proof regulatory environment, the strategy will need to look into the trends and the frontiers of biotechnology and digital technologies. DG Sante takes the lead on this proposal, but it is clear that the strategy will be the result of cooperation between different policy areas. This goes without saying. Now, let's go into a different picture, which is basically which are the objectives that we want to attain. Some of them I have already mentioned. The lessons from the pandemic are there, and we need to make this sector better prepared and more resistant to crisis. We also need to ensure greater access and availability of pharmaceuticals to patients, ensure affordability of medicines for patients and health systems is extremely important, is a priority. Enable the innovation, including for unmet medical needs. This issue of the unmet needs is extremely important, and we need to do so harnessing the benefits of the digital policies that we have, but also of the emerging science and technology, so that we reduce also the environmental footprint. We also would like to support the EU competitiveness on the global level through this policy. So you can see here in this small slide all the objectives that we are aiming to have. In the next slide, as I can show to you here, we would like to indicate to you the timeline that we have ahead of us. So we had a 13-week online public consultation that took place and finished just in September. We have received 242 position papers on the roadmap and 470 respondents filled in our online survey. We had a 2-day stakeholder workshop, to discuss with the various players the aspects of the strategy, and we have regular meetings with the Pharmaceutical Committee to ensure that we listen to the member states and that we get a strategy that is aligned with their needs. The competencies of member states are huge in this field, so we must listen to them. We are planning to adopt the Commission communication by the end of this year, you know. The implementation of the strategy, though, will be a combination of legislative and non-legislative actions, you know, and this will span throughout the duration of the current Commission's mandate. The communication and the follow-up or evaluation work will give us the elements, you know, for the Commission to consider a targeted revision of the pharmaceutical legislation. The strategy is not the end, but it's the beginning of the work, if I may say. I take you to another slide. We are more or less going on to see which are the topics that were most, I would say, voted in the consultations. So we read the, I would say, the statements, and we can see that somehow there is a revolution in biotechnology and in the digital world. Science has arrived to a point where gene editing and, you know, has tools that became extremely precise, extremely reliable, and these open avenues for radically new therapies, and some of them have already reached the market, you know. So, you know, we can quote to you a few examples, like Zolgensma, the 2 million euro spinal muscular atrophy treatment. Artificial intelligence will also provide us with driverless cars, but, you know, also with new medicines and treatments. We need our regulatory environment to be ready to understand and to respond to these developments. You know, we also need to be able to actively promote innovation. We think that in support of innovation, we can have infrastructure, incentives, and funding that can make Europe a global innovation hub. I give you now a few examples of unmet medical needs. Rare diseases. It's a fast-growing market, but still 94% of rare diseases have no cure. Antimicrobial resistance. No business incentive to develop new class of antibiotics that would be kept on the shelf. Neurodegenerative disease. Growing proportion of society suffers from it. Suffers from Alzheimer's disease, from dementia. Enormous market, but science is not yet there. So despite positive trends, I can say, inability to cure, too many die and suffer from cancer. So I must say that the public consultation showed, I would say, some broad elements, broad consensus on EU actions to address these shortages of medicines. Shortages are increasingly frequent for products that have been on the market for many years. This is something that, you know, we need to reverse this trend. Is a serious concern for us all, and has been so for a while. In some cases, shortages are the result of fragile supply chains. So too few suppliers, and there is a lack of business motives for a cheap and low volume drug, for instance. The availability of medicines is not the only concern, I may say to all of you. It's also the quality, the safety, especially for those products that are produced far from Europe. So Europe needs a strategic oversight of the supply of medicines, of the raw materials, and needs to avoid heavy unilateral dependence, you know, from, I would say, value chains that are globally integrated but may have very few suppliers. I think I would like to continue our trip by showing to you that innovative and promising therapies do not always reach the patient. So patients in the EU still have different levels of access to medicine. So I go back to the word affordability, affordable. The affordability of medicines has implications, both for public and household finances. It poses a growing challenge to the majority of member states. And, you know, the business model has moved from selling blockbusters to marketing niche busters. New products have ever higher prices, with growing uncertainty over the real life effectiveness and related overall costs. Decisions on the pricing and reimbursement of medicines are the purview of EU member states. I fully realize. The Commission can only step up cooperation amongst member states with the backing of countries. Generic and biosimilar medicines provide accessible and affordable treatment to a large number of patients, and policies that further the support of greater generic and biosimilar competition would be beneficial. Finally, I would say we remain here with two final slides. I would say the first one is about the COVID pandemic. Here we had an urgent but also very rare occurrence. This rare occurrence should not overwhelm the strategy. We need to have a longer term view. The strategy will need to assess the improvements needed. They are needed to deal with such threats in a faster way, but we need to have a governance and the tools to build mechanisms that can deal with emergencies and can also help us in the long term. So I would conclude here. I hope we will have a very fruitful discussion. Apologies because I will need to jump out of this discussion quite quickly, but I am very, very, I would say, grateful if I can have the beginnings of the discussion till 5 o'clock when I will still be around. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very interesting and thorough introduction to what I think is going to be a very good discussion. You ended just now on your looking at the challenges of COVID-19, and I'm just wondering, what can you say about what we've learned, particularly from the advanced purchasing agreements that have been entered into for COVID-19 vaccines? What have we learned about collaboration and solidarity amongst the member states that you might want to take forward into the pharmaceutical strategy?
I learned that the word union and the word solidarity are very important. So the first thing, union. You may remember that there was a group of member states that started this drive towards vaccines, and I may say I'm very grateful to them because they ignited the European engine. Because in the end, we became 27, and there is no individual, or I would say single or group of member states contract. It's the whole of the EU. For all member states, we will have the same portfolio, which is a good thing to have. Not a member state will be left out from the vaccines that the EU will have in the portfolio. The second word that I say is solidarity. And solidarity means also that, we have had the impression many a times that there has been work in terms of research. It has been going on. We needed also, I would say, the support of the public in terms of having pharmaceutical companies embrace this challenge. Some of these companies are doing so at cost. It's very praiseworthy. They are fixing prices that are very low. But in general, the pharmaceutical companies have been moved by the interest to go towards this vaccine because they have realized that they cannot stay out of the fray. They cannot stay out of the challenge. And this is out also of a movement of solidarity within Europe that we stretch across Europe, but beyond Europe. Because let me say to you, it is often quoted that the President and Commissioner Kyriakides often say, we need to have vaccines for all. So Europe is fully committed to go with solidarity beyond Europe. We need to be supportive of the vaccines for the rest of the world. This is not vaccines for Europeans, it's vaccines for everybody. So, union and solidarity were two big words in this process.
Thank you very much. We actually had a question in from the audience, which follows on just a little bit from that, which is, are we looking for any sort of solidarity around COVID treatments as well as vaccines? Do you have a word on that?
I must say that we have treatments, or at least we're starting to have treatments. The solidarity goes to the point that in some respects, when we have joint procurements, we tend to give the quantities to the countries that are most in need. Because let me say to you, supplies are not overabundant. And so Whenever a country needs a specific treatment, we try in the joint procurement to distribute it. And I think this is a big gesture. In the small technicalities of the joint procurement, it's folded there. Perhaps nobody knows about this, but it's a gesture from member states who don't need perhaps the medicine and pass it on. We had the issue on ICU medicines. This was clear. We had the issue on remdesivir. We had the issue, and I can quote you many examples where solidarity is also helpful. Now, may I say to you, we have been concentrating a lot on the vaccines. We need to populate more the area of treatments, and here it's perhaps an aspiration I have, that we will have also the good research that is there and the good pharmaceutical companies also investing more in the treatments. But we are dealing with a huge emergency, and I am very proud of the way member states have tried to express solidarity also on the treatments.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your great input. We know that you're going to have to leave us shortly, so we're very grateful you'll stay with us for a little while. What I'm going to do now is invite our panelists to turn on their cameras and join the discussion. And I'm going to invite them to react to the presentation that you've just made. So we have 4 panelists with us. Already on camera, we have Lorraine Nolan, Chief Executive of the Irish Medicines Agency. Thank you for joining us. And we will be joined shortly also by Thomas Bowles, Head of Government Affairs and Public Policy, EMEA and Asia Pacific for PTC Therapeutics. Rex Clements, CEO of Centriant Pharmaceuticals. And we then do also have with us Lydia Meus, Managing Director of the Anti-Cancer Fund. But I believe she may have some bandwidth issues because she's actually not connecting from her office at the moment. So we may not see her on the video. And then from your team, Sandra, we have Andre Riche with us, who will be happy to answer any questions that you unfortunately might not be there for. And I'm sure you will interact with him afterwards to gain the feedback from this event. So I do invite my colleagues on the panel to turn their cameras on, but let me actually begin by inviting Lorraine Nolan. Lorraine, would you like to give your initial reaction to what we've heard from Sandra? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Petra, and thank you, Sandra, I think, for a very interesting and exciting presentation. And I think from my point of view, I would say that it is an incredible time of opportunity for policymakers and regulators alike. And I very much so welcome what I would describe as the pillars of the strategy and the objectives that they set out. They are exactly, I think, the pertinent issues that are facing our health system, and also the things that we must deliver on to meet the needs of patients. I'm very struck as well by the synergies that exist between the pharmaceutical strategy proposal, but also what is emerging as the key themes in the joint strategy between the European Medicines Agency and the Heads of Medicines Agency network in their development of the next iteration of a regulatory network strategy. And that is fantastic, because that is actually about alignment, and alignment, as we all know, enshrines partnership. And I think it is through that partnership approach that, the important thing under any strategy is about the delivery. And I think that sets us up to achieve on the delivery. From my perspective as the head of a regulatory agency that has responsibility for a range of health products, from medicines to medical devices, veterinary medicines, I think the thing for me that is really important is it's not so much what any strategy actually contains. I think the key secret to being strategic for all of us is knowing what kind of regulators we actually have to be to respond to the changing regulatory environment. And I think coming at it from the perspective of a regulator, our role is always going to come down to the prevention of harm to the public. But where we are really seeing the real growth, evolution in our role, and the paradigm shift, is the role that we play in enabling access. And I do really welcome the emphasis that this strategy is placing on access, both in the areas of unmet need and the innovation support. But also, I think it addresses very well the reality that when you come and look at health service delivery, and in a country like Ireland, 70% of the medicines used within our health system are actually generics. They are off-patent medicines, and often the unsung heroes of health system delivery. And I would also say, for me, what I really, really do welcome in this strategy is the balance that it places in looking at access between those two parameters of supporting innovation on one hand and then supporting availability, having choice, range of affordability. And I really think it strives to set out equitability for all. So I think that is incredibly welcome for me. But again, I would come back to the science that the strategy sets the framework for the policy environment in which we must operate, and it is about how we change. And I think from my perspective, looking over the next 5 years, how I really believe the way regulation of products is discharged, and that needs to change, is about ensuring that it continues to add value. And I think there's a number of ways in which we can add value, and that is about looking critically at risk, using intelligence and different information sources to decide what we focus on, how we discharge our roles, because there's no point in continually inspecting or assessing things that are compliant. So I do think we need to become much more realistic in this. The second big change that I think will happen in regulatory roles under the framework that is here is the really important integration between product regulation and health service delivery. I think our success as regulators is really so much driven by understanding the needs of health systems and the needs of patients. And I think we will be made so much more successful by that. So looking forward to all that's ahead and some opening thoughts from me. So I leave it there, Petra.
Thank you very much. That's some great additional thoughts that you've brought into us there. I'm not sure whether we have Lydia with us at the moment. I'm going to therefore move. Yes, Lydia, you're here.
Yes,
yes. We can hear you. We have a little bit of interference, but let's see how we go. So Lydia Mews, you're the Managing Director of the Anti-Cancer Fund. Would you like to give your reactions to Sandra Galina's presentation?
First of all, I would like to thank the organization for inviting us as a not-for-profit research foundation, that we can be part of this important discussion. And yes, of course, we were struck by the focus on affordable drugs. And there we have some ideas, because we think that we really need a complementary pathway of drug development for what we would call non-commercial drug development, because I think we have to admit that the pharma industry has to serve their stakeholders, and that means that profit is a requirement for the pharma industry. They should not be blamed for that. But we have seen also in the example of COVID that sometimes drugs, old generic drugs, can be repurposed to come with solutions. And then, of course, the system is not prepared for that. And we really have to go back to the drawing board and think how we can solve this. I must say there was an elegant solution from EMA to use an article, and a very cheap drug, dexamethasone, was approved for the COVID indication. But there's a really huge research field out there where this can be, the same strategy can be applied for other indications, and especially for rare diseases and for rare cancers. We should not forget that 22% of the cancers are rare cancers, and you cannot expect that the pharma industry will put a lot of money and energy in those very rare diseases. So the question is, can we not be creative and think of really good private-public collaborations and come with solutions, and that the collaborative group, the clinicians, take their responsibility of setting up that type of research in collaboration, but that we do not expect all the solutions to come from the industry. And also, I was happy to hear that the unmet needs were mentioned, but there again, I know that pharma industry is asking to define these unmet needs more precisely, and it's really up, I think, to Europe in particular to come up with where the needs clearly are. And I think the society, the foundations, we have to pool our resources, and we have to help in defining where those needs are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Sandra, thank you very much for your time. We look forward to maybe having you with us again at the very end, but thank you.
Apologies, I leave you in the able hands of a real doctor, Andre. He's a doctor, I'm not. So, I'm only minding the numbers and the money, but, he's a real doctor. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to the audience. I wish this were a more physical encounter, but, the times are such that it's good to go also remote because we are reaching much more broadly. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering, Rex Clemens, from CEO of Centrion Pharmaceuticals, are you perhaps ready to give your reaction?
Certainly I am. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
So I'll keep my remarks fairly short. So I find the outline of the strategy refreshing and invigorating, and the speed and clarity with which it's moving is certainly, I think, helpful for us from the pharmaceutical industry. So I represent a smaller company that's perhaps in a different part of the pharma sector, in that we focus on nearly exclusively off-patent drugs. We focus on the active ingredient manufacturing, and the largest part of our portfolio is antibiotics for communicable diseases, which for a long time has been, when you look at big pharma, one of the less interesting areas for innovation, for investment. It's largely seen as old school style. I think the challenges that we face from an industry point of view, and what I like here, what I see the strategy talk about a lot, is really around the reimbursement systems and how member states are being encouraged to think about reimbursement. For many years, the pure driver on reimbursement for off-patent drugs has become more and more cost, and we recognize the need that access is driven by low-cost generic drugs. It is essential to keep healthcare systems around the world solvent, and I think we do a large part in playing at that. At the same time, that of course has the result that it drives and benefits scale, and more of these essential drugs are being manufactured in fewer and fewer facilities around the world, often consolidated down to one or two facilities, giving a high level of risk to the supply chain. So as member states take the guidance in this strategy, for me, what is refreshing is to think about diversity and robustness of supply chains and core generics. When I think about the generic drugs that we produce in terms of the antibiotics, these are really the cornerstone of the global healthcare system. Without effective primary antibiotics that treat gram-positive, gram-negative infections, a lot of what we do in medicine becomes practically impossible to achieve. So a lot of the rare disease drugs we talk about, a lot of the advanced treatments, especially interventionist treatments, will become impossible to be applied if we cannot treat the basic infections that patients incur when they undergo the more advanced piece. So to me, this is a core component of healthcare that I like to see and work with DJ Sante and other groups on how we progress and ensure the reliability of our supply chains around these drugs.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we look forward to dealing a little bit more with the issues around APIs and generics a little bit later. Let me see again. Thomas Boels, are you able to intervene this time?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you.
I don't know
Please.
what happened. It worked all the time. It's just not at the moment I had to speak. So anyway, thank you for inviting me to this panel, and thank you for allowing me to make some comments. Maybe I say first a few words about the company, because that puts my comments in perspective. So I work for a company called PTC Therapeutics, which was created, I think, 20 years ago. The company founder is still our CEO nowadays, and it's a company that is sort of what we call mid-size. So it's not an SME according to the definition that, for example, the Commission uses, but it's also not a large pharmaceutical company. I mean, the turnover is less than 500 million a year, so it's not nothing, but it's also not big. What makes us maybe a bit unique is that we are focusing only on rare diseases, although we have at the moment also a therapy in clinical trials for COVID-19, so that's probably interesting. And we will be launching our first gene therapy next year for a rare disease, an ultra rare disease called AADC deficiency. So maybe against that background, indeed I want to make some comments on what Sandra had said before and the upcoming pharma strategy. I think first of all, it's actually for me personally quite interesting to see that we have a strategy coming up at all that focuses on health. I mean, some of us who have been around for a while will remember that not so long ago there was even serious discussions about whether the EU should actually focus on health at all. Was this a competence or not? So to have now a strategy, I think is really important. Also, of course, as I think somebody said before, maybe it has now become a real priority because of COVID-19. It is indeed important to learn some lessons from the current crisis, and one is not only that we have to work all together, but that also the solutions will come from innovation, from biopharmaceutical companies, whether it's therapies or vaccines, etc. And there are a lot of lessons learned, I think, that we can apply, hopefully not only to prepare better for the next crisis, but I think as a company that also maybe takes a longer perspective and say, what are we going to do beyond COVID-19? Can we indeed apply the lessons learned in the way we operate and we function at the moment to tackle this crisis? Can it apply also to let's call it standard pharmaceutical issues or regulatory issues? I think that's very important. I'm also taken the word affordable or affordability or access came up several times, which is another, I think, quite an interesting novelty to have that indeed discussed at an EU level, because I think, again, as the Commission said before, this is really a competence for member states. And at the EU level, it was not so much discussed until now. I think it is important indeed to really look at that and what are issues around affordability and access. But we also would really call upon the Commission when it produces its strategy to really maintain this balance that was mentioned before between actually a number of different very important objectives. Access to patients, yes, but also indeed sustainable healthcare budget, but also how to support innovation in healthcare and in particular in the pharmaceutical industry. So we see really the EU pharma strategy to maintain a careful balance between, let's call it, those three cornerstones of any health policy: supporting innovation, ensuring fast access, and indeed ensuring that healthcare budgets maintain sustainable, of course. And I think in particular the industrial policy for the pharmaceutical sector is indeed important, because the situation in Europe is good, but it's not entirely positive. So if I look at the area that we're active in, as I said before, we're about to launch a gene therapy. So the sector of ATMPs, if you look at that, roughly globally, the investment in ATMP companies is around 9 billion euro, of which 3 billion is in Europe, right? So in itself, that's not bad, and there are many smaller companies that are coming up. But if you look, for example, at clinical trials for gene therapies and cell therapies, the proportion that is being done in Europe is actually far smaller. So the story is quite mixed. And if you compare the industry, let's say the innovative biopharmaceutical industry, compared to the US, where I think we've always been in competition, of course, to see who is doing what. But if you now also look at countries like China, which even in my lifetime have gone from completely absent to, with all respect, copying pharmaceuticals, to really drive now actually a very innovative agenda, because they have a real strong plan and strategy. I think in that sort of triangle, Europe, China, and the US, I think it's very important to have a policy and a pharmaceutical strategy that supports innovation in Europe if we don't want to fall behind. I think the biggest issue for us, particularly as a smaller company, is the particularity of Europe, right? The cliche is that the beauty of Europe lies in its diversity, which is probably true from a, let's call it, cultural aspect, but from a business R&D, etc. aspect, it's actually it's a hindrance. The fact that we as a smaller company have to deal with many different countries that have different requirements is a serious hinder. So any strategy that the EU will come up with, and bearing in mind the competencies between EU and member state that can settle that or can streamline that, I think would be in particular welcome from companies like us and even smaller companies, right? So it's still difficult to organize clinical trials across Europe, despite legislation, because of the different requirements of ethical committees, etc. If you take a subject like HTA, we know the Commission has proposed that, and we're a big supporter of that, but it's still not there. We still have a fragmented EU regulatory HTA system with every not even 27 different requirements, because there are regions that have their different requirements that you all have to satisfy, which are very important. Indeed, access and affordability, the countries take a very different approach to uptake of innovative therapies, and it's not always linked to price, right? It's not that countries that cannot afford it are more reluctant to take up innovation. Again, from our own company, we have a therapy for rare disease on the market since 2015, and it's not reimbursed in all countries, and there's no correlation between, let's call it, poorer countries not being able to pay for it and richer countries have access to it. So it is more complicated than that. And maybe finally, what is also two elements that we think it's very important to tackle maybe through the pharma strategy. One is cross-border health. We despite having two pieces of legislation on allowing patients from one country to be treated in another country, that's still not really efficiently organized, and we think that's very important, in particular for rare disease patients that also would benefit from therapies like gene therapies. And the other is the whole area, and I'm sure this will come up, if not today, then throughout the whole conference and beyond that, is the buzzwords real world evidence. We really need a European framework for the use of real world evidence, because again, for rare diseases and very advanced therapies, that is a very important concept to supplement data that comes through clinical trials. And maybe if I make a final comment,
we are on we have tight time, but so if
okay, then I make short of my question. It's a real plea. When you talk about an EU pharmaceutical strategy, we think it's really important to keep the member states really involved. I mean, again, those of who have been longer involved, is that the success of any initiative that is being developed at an EU level will stand or fall, whether it will be really pulled through not only at the European level but also at the member state level. So that's a final plea. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for ending on that request, and ending on a request to the Commission is always good. When I'm handing over to a director from the European Commission to answer some of the questions. So it's my pleasure to invite André Riesch, Director for Health Systems, Medicinal Products, Innovation in DG Sante, to respond a little bit to what you have heard our panelists say, but perhaps also you might like to reflect on some of the questions that we're getting in from the audience. And there is one that I particularly draw to your attention, the one that currently has the most votes, which is the role of the strategy for generics and biosimilars. So handing over to you, André. Thank you.
There are many aspects of this debate already. I mean, Thomas really enlarged, to already few important dimensions. Lauren also spoke about the important, challenges in science. Rex referred to the problems with the supply chain and the way, the generic industry is developing, and also it's important message from Lydia concerning the investment in those medicines. They may bring therapies but for a number of reasons they are not going through the development. So I will start from the bigger picture. I think we have to also decide this strategy. There will be bigger picture. I mean, we cannot, as any strategy, it will not solve the problems. I think we need to try to put on this map as many problem as we can define in this moment of time, and try to at least give the light and the direction of travel. Of course, this journey will take time. It's we all know that any regulatory change needs careful assessment, but also has to be implemented, timely, but also together. Because I think the last point, I think it should be the starting point, because our system is quite complex because of the relations between EU level and member states level. And I like what COVID show, and I think Lauren most probably agreed that we can work together. Even it looks like in the beginning that there are so many barriers between us, mean the EU level and member states, because of the way regulation was set up. But in practice, we always find a way to look social. But at the same time, the ways things are set up didn't help. The example will be the clinical trials. When we instinctively, we all knew that we need clinical trials, done together. But when the different protocols were established in country A, B, and C, and D, was no way to kind of agree, because already the clinical trials were already rolled out, because COVID started earlier in one country, so there were bigger push from clinicians to start those clinical trials. In other countries, was more pushed by, let's say, WHO protocols. The third country did different approach. So, and then when you try to ask the question, okay, how we can bring those data together, of course, the problems are arriving. So I think we need to reflect more about the kind of way we would like to govern together the system. I like the concept of EU regulatory network, which I think is already rooted in somehow in our regulatory practice. We have to reflect how to do this better, where are the barriers we would like to crush. The second point is about we have some good legislation, but there are barriers with the implementation. So we try, through the different, you referred, Thomas, to the advanced therapy, which was one of my favorite topics. So we try to push this legislation through the kind of action plan, jointly developed by Commission, European Medicines Agency, and HMA in different parts. And we of course, there are parts we advance, there are parts still we cannot. Same for pediatrics, and we see also limit of this. So we have to reflect, where we need to maybe fix some problems. And I will finish with two important points which really needs to be reflected. I mean, the whole kind of system around the process. First, innovations are born, in the scientific environment, the universities, companies, small companies, bigger, and so on. How to make sure that those innovations can go to the next phase? What support they need? What is the public funding role compared to the private sources? How to make venture capital more interested, in European market than pull money on the US clinical trials, because we know that the Cambridge phenomenon, but it's not about Cambridge UK, but Cambridge Boston. When many of our companies travel there to get simply smooth or better way of financing and so on. So this link between investment and need for investment is important, and also to the questions about generic and biosimilars. Of course, they are part of the bigger picture. We will not create a sustainable system without having clear role for generics and biosimilars. This was decided. We are market for generics and biosimilars. So all countries are having a relatively big share of those medicines in the portfolio. Can we do more? it's a good question. I understand this is a lot of ideas, a lot of also push from different payers or regulators in the member states. But for sure, we need also establish clear, let's say, communication line about the quality and efficacy or effectiveness of those medicines. So I also, maybe it was interesting comment for Thomas, basically I was summarizing, more Europe, so it's better. So it looks like would be good to reflect on this. But of course I am not hunting for more responsibility. I would like to find for better system.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to a round of questions to each of our presenters now, and then I'm going to come back to some of the questions that we have from the panel. Actually, the question that currently has the most votes is a question which I'm not going to pose, but I'm going to invite Andrzej, if he happens to know the answer, or one of his staff, to maybe post that answer, because it's the question that is asking what is the ratio between industry, academic and public organizations, patient organizations that have responded to the consultation. I'm assuming that you don't have those data to hand right now, so perhaps
I do. You see, I do.
Being kind to you. So let's go through. To answer that one.
So for we have patients, consumer organization 59 response, healthcare professionals 48, healthcare provider organization 26, healthcare pricing reimbursement body 10, industry, pharmaceutical, medical devices, and chemical. This is important because we have also other industry parts responsive. 128 API producers, important, 64. SMEs, back to Thomas, 65 response. So we have also pharmaceutical traders and wholesalers 14. EU national public authority 23 is important. So we are connected to this debate with the member states. Academic researchers 27. European research infrastructure research funders, scientific organizations 35, and members of the public, including care providers, patients 93, and others.
Okay.
So well, I think this is quite rich and diverse outcome.
I'm impressed that you had all those numbers to hand, and I will never ever doubt again. And any horrible question, I'll just throw it straight at you from now on. I think what is important from that, though, and particularly for the audience that we have, and we have a very sizable audience. However, almost all our audience members are signed in simply with a guest number, so I can't tell anything about who you are. But if your particular sector is underrepresented, don't hesitate to make sure that your voices are heard. But in terms of voices that are important in the pharmaceutical sector, of course, the regulators are a key player. So, Lorraine, I would like to turn first to you. COVID-19 has seen regulators have to respond much more quickly than they'd before. You've had new types of approval procedures. What's your view about the possibility of keeping that flexibility and that speed going once we come out of this COVID phase? Or for drugs that have nothing to do with COVID?
Thanks very much, Petra. And I guess really probably the burning question, given the experience we have all just come through over the last 8 months or so. Just in responding to you, the first thing I'd say is the term flexibility is probably not one I like, because it sort of suggests maybe that standards were compromised in some way. And I don't believe we compromised any standards. So I think it is really more about agile approaches. And I think, Thomas has referred to this in his response to the strategy as well, to, what does this all mean for the future? And we've seen, I think, very quick movement of the regulatory system in relative terms. And I mean, just to kind of speak to a few, we've had, accelerated assessment procedures for medicines used for treatment in COVID. We've also had, fast-tracked approvals of clinical trials. And we've also had the exceptional change management process for management of post-approval changes for medicines used in treatment, flexibilities with leaflets and labeling. And I think a massive adoption of regulatory compliance requirements to take account of the shift in the working environment, particularly within the industry, the clinical trial setting as well, to working in a remote environment. So, you know, while things have been done quite reactively, and that is the situation that we have been responding to address, I think we have managed to achieve putting into practice some of those value add processes that I spoke about a few moments ago. So I think that is a very important consideration in terms of looking to the future. And coming back to both Thomas's point and Andre's point about more Europe, what I think has been great is the alignment that we have achieved through the European regulatory network, so from the Commission to the EMA and through the HMA itself, in solidarity and consistency within the regulatory approach. So I think that has been great. And I also think that harmonization, you know, through exchanging, through not just European networks, through international networks, through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies, which is a voluntary coalition which includes all of the regulators from across the regions, we've actually moved, you know, in thinking about harmonization on the global scale. So I think there's fantastic fruit here for thinking about the future. And I would also say, you know, definitely it is going to change how we move forward. Take, for instance, the inspections area. And for a lot of agencies, we haven't been able to go into manufacturing facilities and conduct inspections. But, you know, while we are faced with that situation, we've kept the regulatory oversight going by adapting to doing inspections more remotely and virtually. Now, not everything in an inspection can be done that way, but certainly we've proved to ourselves that some of it can be. And I think this is one example where you think about the intensive resource demands on the regulatory system in terms of carrying out inspections, or particularly because the industry is so globalized, you have all the travel kind of burden on top of that as well too. This is definitely going to change future practice in relation to, you know, how we actually conduct oversight. But having said that, the question really is more about what can we keep from this to the future. And I definitely think we have a huge amount to think about. And, you know, some things worked very, very well. Some things didn't. And, you know, there's always opportunity from crises, but we need to look at both of those things very honestly and realistically. We saw enormous challenges during very difficult months around March time period in terms of, particularly in the medical device area, in terms of availability of testing, diagnostics, protective equipment, and so on. And we're all familiar with this. So those are things that maybe didn't work so well. So I think a period of reflection is called for. I think time of implementation of strategy is always a great time for thinking about how do we change, how do we adapt moving forward. So I think that honest reflection really needs to happen. And I've mentioned the work of ICMA itself. I think what is really fantastic is to see now in terms of that coordination and harmonization piece, ICMA has established a work stream to look at this across the global regions. So whatever comes from this as a lessons learned and adaptation of approach, we're also using the opportunity to drive convergence and harmonization through the global regions on that as well too. So I think phenomenal experience. I don't think anybody is going to walk away from this and say, well, it's back to the way it was. But I do think we need to reflect carefully on how we move forward.
Thank you. That's very interesting to hear that we're not going to go back to the way it was, and that there are important lessons to be learned. And I think actually that goes throughout all of the things that we're going to be talking about. I am keeping an eye on the questions that are top of the list, but I also do want to make sure that our panelists are able to talk about the issues that they have brought to this session. So with that, I would like to turn to Lydie Meus and ask about your feelings about the amount of new cancer drugs that are being brought to market. And do you think that we really need all the new cancer drugs that are being brought to market? And perhaps you would like to have a comment on that. Thank you, Lydie.
Thank you. As I really can confirm that we have a really thick pipeline in oncology, because before COVID, half of the clinical trials were in oncology. So, of course, we welcome all those new innovative drugs, but there are two buts. First of all, they should add clinical benefit for the patients, and they should bring a solution for an unmet need. And I think what we see today, unfortunately, is that we have more and more what I would call Me Too products in oncology. Let me explain. So we've seen in oncology that there's a really booming knowledge of the cancer ecosystem. And so there has been new targets identified, especially in the immune field. And as a result of that, we have like really several companies all targeting the same drug target. We have plenty of checkpoint inhibitors, like 800 trials today are with checkpoint inhibitors. We have the same thing also in precision oncology for PARP inhibitors and so on. And how does that come? Again, it's understandable because the pharma industry and their stakeholders want molecules, and of course everybody is happy with the guaranteed success of those molecules. So yes, I would say we need new drugs, but we really have to focus on the unmet needs. And also if we talk about innovation, again, I think it's important that we define innovation, because it's not because it's a new molecule, it's by definition, it will be beneficial for the patient. And I can give examples like there was a really ATMP molecule like Provenge for prostate cancer, a high-tech molecule, well, actually a cellular therapy, but then it was developed, it was approved by EMA, but then the countries didn't want to reimburse because the added clinical value was limited. So the company had to take it off the market again in Europe. So we really have to focus with innovation on what brings value to patients. And I think we should define innovation more as a new approach to save a challenge and not necessarily a completely new drug. And as I said, there is a lot of drugs out there, and with the new insight into the biology, especially in cancer, we could think of repurposing, and that happens. That's what the industry is doing in a commercial way. Viagra is a very successfully repurposed molecule. We should not forget that. But there are other molecules to be repurposed with less commercial interest, and then we have to find other solutions for that. So I really think we have to be more creative, and we have to incentivize really clinical improvement and transformative new treatments. I will stop here, sorry.
Thank you very much. And you've raised a couple of issues that are also very high in the questions. Two issues from the questions that I will want to come back to. One is particularly around pricing and reimbursement, and the other is around what innovation really means. But on the issue of innovation, I'd like to turn to Thomas Boels and ask you about orphan regulation and the flourishing market that we see in new orphan products, but also ask you to comment on the rather delicate subject then of the price tags, which sometimes are attached to the new orphan medicines. Thomas, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe. I think the starting point is you talk about the orphan drug regulation. It's 20 years ago that this was developed. I think we should not, and it's now under debate, right? It's clearly that the Commission has published different reports. There are studies out there to review it, and first observation is, of course, yeah, it would make sense to review something that's 20 years old. But I think most importantly, actually, we shouldn't forget that I think it is a huge success. I mean, I'm sure that the European Commission, when it looks at its overall regulatory framework, not only in pharma, but in any sector, I think you probably can't find too many examples of regulatory instruments that have really been so instrumental in developing something, let's say, in a positive way, right? In the sense, and the orphan drug regulation is a very good example that there was a period before the regulation when there was no focus on rare diseases. There were hardly any orphan medicines being developed. And after the establishment of the regulation, when indeed, as you say, there is a fairly flourishing market. And that is not only because of the orphan drug regulation and the incentive, but also because of ever increasing knowledge about the disease mechanisms, in particular in the rare disease field, of course. So I think the first observation is that we think it's a success, and the incentives that it provides are probably are very, very beneficial for the further development of that. When it comes to whether you want to review that or whether they are sufficient, as I said, I think that you could think about maybe looking at it. But I think also more importantly, it's not only that the companies need incentives to develop something. It's also maybe something like, okay, what's the market environment in which you want to develop something? So, and some of it reflects maybe what I said earlier around the EU pharmaceutical strategy. So, can you have a specific regulatory pathway more for the approval of orphan drugs? I mean, there are certain pathways there already, but I think it can be better done. One particular challenge with orphan drugs and rare diseases is the fact that because you have a limited number of patients, you cannot generate the data through classic clinical trial data because they're simply not there. So therefore, you have to shift the evidence to post-approval through real-world evidence, and that is a challenge. So can we improve that? If we would improve that, that would be also a great incentive, right? And clinical trials is also about clinical trial design. I mean, our own gene therapy, you cannot do a placebo-controlled trial because it has to, it is being administered directly in the brain through a stereotactic surgery. That's not, you cannot have a placebo arm for that. So can the system approve that? So that is that. On the price things, I think you asked that. Just a few remarks. I think one is that we always try to price medicine as BTC, but overall, what is the value that it brings to patients and healthcare systems. The other thing is that when we talk about the high prices, these are exceptional. It feels a bit, when I was thinking about this session, it feels a bit like we're taking the salary of Messi and take that as a reference point of that's the salary of football players, right? And so, which is not the case, right? We know that the average salary of a football player anywhere is far lower. And for example, orphan drugs, the majority is actually under 45,000 euro per year, which is still a lot of money, but this doesn't make the headline, right? And in terms of budget impact, orphan drugs at the moment are, I think, around 3-4% of what we spend on pharmaceuticals. And what we spend on pharmaceuticals is, again, something around 17-18, but less than 20% what we spend on health. And is actually quite stable because everybody talks about all the new innovation, etc. But the medicine bills, according to WHO or OECD figures, is actually pretty stable over the last 20 years. So I think we need to see that in perspective. And I think as companies, we're always working with payers, others, to come up with all kind of innovative payment models to alleviate any sort of bottlenecks in that space.
So let's come back to that issue about new pricing and reimbursement models in a moment. But let's move from the rather rarefied world of orphan drug products to talk more about generics and how Europe is within the API market. And Rex, I'd invite you to comment on that from your perspective.
So particularly looking at the API market in Europe, so I think what we've really seen, if we think about generics, and for me, it usually comes down to antibiotics because that's the sector we're in. But I think that's a good analog for the small molecule API market. So we see some trends over the past few years. Buyers, mainly the healthcare systems, have been predominantly focused on price, and as a result of that, we've seen this major shift of manufacturing to lower cost countries. But more so than that, it's also led to a very strong consolidation of the supply chain at various steps. So we see manufacturers consolidating, exiting the market, but becoming far, far more consolidated than it was in the past. And so if I give you an example, in one of the areas where we are present, drugs such as cephalosporin antibiotics, and these are usually used in hospital-acquired surgical infections, but they can also be used in primary care for bacterial strep throat and similar treatments. And I think we're all familiar with that, because I think most of us on this call have kids, and so we all remember that first time when you have your newborn and here she is 3 months old, and you get that little liquid suspension antibiotic the first time they have a strep throat infection, and we remember that experience. It's one of the most foundational experiences, because it is the first time that we as the pharmaceutical industry touch a patient. Is that 3-month-old baby, and the family is gathered around at that moment of emotional experience. And yet what's happened with that supply chain is, if you look in Europe, there are 40 different companies marketing finished dose cephalosporins. And so it sounds pretty safe. 40 companies competing in tenders, in negotiations, but those 40 marketers actually get their finished product from 10 companies. That's a 4-to-1 ratio. In turn, those 10 manufacturers of this finished dose buy their API from only 2 European sources. So now we're down to a 20-to-1 ratio to get to the API. And that API in first generation cephalosporins is dependent on an intermediate called 7-ADCA, and there's only one manufacturer in Europe, which is us, with a facility we have in Delft. So the entire first generation cephalosporin supply chain in Europe of 40 different companies marketing it, if they're buying European API, it comes from one facility in Delft at the end of the day, and it becomes a point dependent. So when we think about that and we step back again and say, this is where we as the industry for the first time touch a patient. And all of that depends on one facility today in Europe. The rest is imported, and there's a couple of, so I don't want to be unfair, there are 2 China-based facilities also producing it. But it shows the fragility of the supply chains, how they've been driven down due to the cost, which is the great impact that when you touch the patient for the first time, the healthcare system and patients who is not unknown. I mean, we are the patients, our families are the patients. It's not an unknown, it's not a buyer of a BMW or something. This is something we know intimately, because it's us, it's our own families can afford these drugs because of the price consciousness. At the same time, it's had the effect that it's caused a huge fragility in the supply chain. And so I think that's just something for us to bear in mind when we think about small molecule supply chain in Europe and how fragile it's become.
Thank you. I think you've raised some issues there, and I think thank you for sharing those numbers. I think that will have been quite eye-opening.
Do you hear me?
That will have been quite eye-opening to some of our audiences.
Hello?
So, Anjay, I would like to come to you now to ask you your comments on the things that you've heard coming up from the presenters, from our panelists.
Andrews, can you hear me?
Hello? Have we got some interference coming in there?
You are mute.
Hello, right, thank you very much. So Anjay,
I think we are waiting for Petra, and in the meantime, could I comment on the orphan drug price setting?
Yeah.
So I would like to comment on the new model that is becoming more and more popular of the value-based pricing, which is certainly the case for all those orphan drugs and the gene therapies. But we think that you should really not completely disconnect the price from the cost of goods, because if I would like to give an example of what was mentioned already by Sandra Galina, the Zolgensma, which is an adenoviral vector priced at almost 2 million, we all know. It's a one-shot therapy for a rare genetic disease. But then if you think that exactly the same product, the adenoviral vector, is now developed as a vaccine for COVID by both AstraZeneca and J&J. So production cost, the whole development system is the same. It's like the difference between an iPhone 6 and an iPhone 10. It's a different gene in that adenoviral vector, but then the vaccine will be at the price of $2. And so that's where I think it's an extreme example, but you see, if you completely disconnect the cost of goods from the final price setting, it seems questionable to me.
Thank you very much. Anjay, if you'd like to answer that, and then
I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that. But,
I'm conscious that we are a little bit running out of time here. So if I could ask you, I could ask you to answer Lidi's question, and then perhaps we can also move on to the general issue around pricing and reimbursement. Anjay.
Oh, I don't think it's an easy answer to this point. You know, for sure the moment when price was announced, you know, 2 millions, and was really, I think, shocking kind of moment for many. It's also triggered the kind of new reflex in society, which was quite I think also interesting that people started to collect money for these individuals, you know, needs. But at the same time, you know, it's all these questions about what is the right price, and they will remain. I mean, whatever medicines, you know, high price medicines we take, there always will be the discussion about the cost of treatment, you know, because others, the critics will say that this is too much. Those they believe is the right approach because we have, you know, treatment which hopefully will treat or at least prolong life in the better conditions for patients. So I don't think we will solve dilemma during this debate on strategy, because, you know, we have to really look for systemic solution, and of course this question, high price medicines most probably will remain, you know, unanswered. I frankly speaking, I don't believe, you know, that this will go away, because it will stay with us. I don't know if we will be able to find a good answer. But I think the issues on APIs, which I think Rex refer, you know, the big question, you know, in front of us is, you know, what is the business model, you know, in industry, which you know, we would like to see as regulator in one hand, and also the governments who like to have medicines to our patients, you know, families and everyone. And how much this dependency on one producer, you know, in Europe, or one producer in China is critical. So we are now in the kind of discussion with all parts of industry, chemical, pharmaceutical industry, generics, innovators, to see how this coalition or alliance of cooperation can work. And also the government's role is in question. You know, some people say we have to move more to the government-driven kind of industry. Others say, no, maybe it's too far. You know, we cannot take responsibility from the private sector and kind of start to build national companies. You know, so I think we are still in this shock, if I may say, because the shock started relatively with L'Oréal. We know that the discussion about the shortages, you know, started in our network, you know, let's say 10 years ago, even more, with small markets, Estonia or Slovenia. But the hot moment was about 2 years ago, when during summer we have started to see a lot of shortages in big markets like France or Germany as well. So this we have to look for the solution. Of course, one of the big question will be, what is the price to be paid if they would like to make this market, you know, more stable. The other will be, do we have, you know, also technologies, because we would like to have green technologies in Europe. It's also big questions from other part of our industrial strategy, how to make chemical or pharmaceutical technology more green. So this will be other parts. So let's, but we should not leave this, you know, without care. This will be mine. I think there's a consensus in the discussions we have both with industry and regulators that it will not solve without kind of systemic approach. Maybe the one area which we didn't discuss about the digital revolution, because this is part of our also thinking, what already I think Thomas referred to the real world data, and because this is a link to other sector. I think Lauren already mentioned, link to services or medical devices or digital. So maybe we can spend a few minutes on this if it's still okay.
Yeah. We're very short on time, but I think that would be very useful, and we can perhaps ask each of the panelists in their closing statement a little bit about.
Do you hear me?
Their Lydia, I'm just finishing a question. If I can ask each of the panelists to reflect on how their sector interacts with other sectors. So, for example, the digital sector is one of them, but also that whole concept of wraparound services around pills, around medicines. We have about just around 10 minutes if we go a little bit over time. I know that Rex needs to leave us the first, so I'm just going to ask Rex if you would like to comment on the sort of the
do you hear me?
In which healthcare services and products are delivered, and also to have your takeaway statement, because I do know that you need to leave us actually at bang on 6 o'clock. Rex.
Sorry, it sounded like there was a second voice. I couldn't quite hear the full part of the question. You want me to comment on what particular? How
you interact with other industries. So, for example, the digital industry, what role that plays for you, but also your sort of take-home message from your sector. If you just like to leave that with us. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. So yes, so I think it's a phenomenally good question. I think the industries that we so being in the API side, we tend to be fairly heavily invested in manufacturing, and so we have been turning a lot to look at emerging technologies around manufacturing, particularly in the ways that we work with genetic companies to improve our processes. So, for example, at Sentient, we do all our manufacturing using what's called an enzymatic process as opposed to a chemical process, and it was developed by our former owners, DSM, in the early 2000s. And effectively, this is a far more sustainable way. It generates a lot less waste. It's a lot more environmentally friendly, and the conversions on the chemicals we use is very high at the end of the day. And so we work a lot with companies that are active in the space to help us improve the efficiencies of these enzymatic processes. We also reach out and work with companies around digital manufacturing techniques to improve the reliability and throughput of our manufacturing, reduce downtime, improve the utilizations that we have overall. So I think it's a good area to partner with more high-tech companies because it brings what's really 30, 40-year-old production processes into the modern world, in our case, 20 years old or so. So that's really the way we've connected with other industries. Then I think maybe picking up a little bit on the sort of the going away statement. So if I go back to the strategy and also some of the topics we've talked about, one of the things that we in the API segment see that's important for Europe and in the generic side is really the need for harmonized standards around the way APIs are procured. And that will really mean specifically bringing in criteria that go beyond price, criteria around environmental standards, around sustainability, as I just spoke about, the enzymatic processes we use, criteria in antibiotics, specifically around antimicrobial resistance, which while that doesn't get a lot of sensitivity right now in the midst of COVID, it is an emerging problem, and it is something that in the next 10 years will be a major issue for the reliability and the efficaciousness of the antibiotics we have, and then also around the diversity of the supply chain. So really, I'd like to see movements that go forward on these topics, harmonized standards around environmental and sustainability, around AMR, and around supplier geography diversity. I know that it's really up to the member states to a large degree, but I do feel that there is probably a level of coordination that can be done on a Europe-wide base around those approaches. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really some great leaving comments, and I'm grateful to you for raising the issues around the environmental impact of the pharmaceutical industry and what you can do to ameliorate some of those issues. Lorraine, I know that you have a particular interest in the emerging sector of real-world data, real-world evidence, and that, of course, implies interaction with the digital sector. Where do you feel that is going?
Yeah, and I think it's been referenced throughout a lot of our discussion this afternoon, and very much so seen as something the regulatory system has to take on embracing more dramatically. So just being very kind of, in the interest of time, summarizing that, I think the challenge for the regulatory system is going to be the area of skills development. And, you know, in terms of framework, and Thomas actually kind of brought this out in terms of his opening speech, piece, I think Europe is coming fast forward in this area in terms of, you know, the policy framework and the regulatory environment. We'll all be familiar with the Big Data Task Force, the establishment of the Big Data Steering Group, and it has 10 pillars underneath it. One of those is looking at skills and training. So very much so what's happening on the European level is happening in the national agencies. So this is really about engagement, I think, with the technology sector to kind of really understand future trends, analysis within the network itself to see where we are in the area of data science, analytics, and what the gaps are and how we actually should address those. And I think academia and industry are huge, you know, important stakeholders for us in relation to that. That also reflects the approach that we are taking at national level. So I think for most agencies now, we are looking at developing blended skill sets, which is exactly what the industry is actually looking at. You know, the fantastic combination of having somebody with a clinical, pharmacy, engineering background, whatever, in combination with data and analytical. So it's either that we invest in upskilling internally, which we are doing. We've looked at a number of academic programs nationally, and I think we're all also looking at that on a European basis to upskill existing people. And then there's also attracting transferable skills. So bringing those skills from those other sectors in to work with our agencies. Now, I think for most regulators, given that we are public sector environments, we are going to find this quite challenging to take forward because the salaries are just not competitive. So again, that's even for us as regulators thinking about our employer brand and our competitiveness. So again, that's different thinking for regulatory agencies that we have done an awful lot on. We've been very successful in attracting talent from the tech sector into the organization through utilization of this approach. And you do find people that have worked in an external environment for a certain number of years at a certain career stage, they're looking for something more ethical to give back, and working in a regulatory environment gives that. So that is a fantastic discovery. Also partnership with academia. And I think for the other thematic that has to come in here is, you know, with innovation trends, and I know Andre will agree with me on this, things are happening so fast. No agency is going to be strong on every single front, areas of ATMPs, digital data, convergence in projects. So agencies are going to have to pick where they invest. And, you know, as I said, it's a time of strategy development for the network. Even my own agency, our strategic planning period aligns with the European network. So skills is very, very much so part of what we're looking at.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude. We are actually 1 minute off the end of our time. The organisers have kindly said we can go a few minutes over, but I also know that our audience will have other things to go to. So let's set a hard stop for 6:05. I'm going to invite Thomas to give your thoughts, both your closing thoughts and your thoughts about collaborations with other sectors. And then I will hand over to Anjay to round us off. Thomas.
Yeah, so thank you. I will be brief. So in terms of straightforward other sectors, the two ones that come to mind, if you talk from the pharma sector, is of course, one is medical devices, actually. I mean, very often they're put together, but they're actually quite separate, also how they're being regulated, etc. But you see, if you look at the innovation that is taking place, it is very often a combination of the two technologies, medicines and as a medical device, and how do we cooperate there and how we can get that through the systems on board. And the other is indeed any company that's focusing on digital, right? I mean, the pharma industry traditionally, I don't think hasn't focused so much on digital, but that has rapidly changed and is changing even more. So there is a wealth of data going around in the countries and companies, et cetera, and we need to pull that together and develop common standards for the usage of data. So the whole IT data sector is another sector that we are very much cooperating with. In terms of closing remark, very short, I'm very positive. I'm very optimistic, actually. I mean, despite all the COVID and working from home, which is rather depressing, but the future looks bright. I mean, if the ones of us who have been around for a little bit longer will remember that when we talked about innovation, the discussions were terrible. You know, it was like okay, I have now a blue pill instead of a green pill, and I call this innovation, and so on. It was a terrible a lack of productivity in the whole pharma sector. And I'm talking about maybe 10, 50 years ago. That has completely changed. And somebody, I think Lydia talked about the oncology pipeline is very thick, but it's not only that, it's other areas as well. There are new technologies are coming up. We're talking about curative therapies. I mean, when did we talk about that and so on? So I think the future looks very bright in that sense, and it's more like how can we stimulate that innovation more, and of course also how can we keep it affordable, and most importantly, how can we get it to patients ASAP and to all patients in Europe. I think that's very important. But I think that we can solve that. But so I'm optimistic about that.
Thank you. Thank you. One of our presenters has had some problems with connection, so I'm just going to actually read a comment that Lydia has sent by email, and it's really just to remind us, and Thomas, you led us very well towards it, which is that the pharma strategy and in fact pharmaceutical products are patient-centered. That means that we need to involve patients and patient organizations in the development of the strategy and its execution. And that probably means the Commission needs to think about different or more partnerships where there is no commercial interest. And that perhaps allows you, Anjay, to make the final comments around where you see those partnerships going within the context of the pharmaceutical strategy. Anjay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for a very rich debate. And I agree with Thomas. It would be great to be today in Valley of Gastein and go for dancing in 2 minutes, but no dancing, no snow in the mountains. So, but I also believe that we should be optimistic because first I think the interest in the positive sense is there. We have interest from regulators, we have interest from patient groups, we have interest from industry, health professionals. We have seen this in the richness of the consultation. We have to navigate together. I agree also with Lydia that because somebody told me already, and I keep this in mind, when we debate, that finally we do this for patients. We do this for patients, we do for our families, we do for ourselves, because we are also patients. If not now, we will be patients in the future. But also we should remind ourselves we live in global world, and we should continue to be responsible also for the interaction global world. Lauren mentioned the way we are interacting with other parts of the global world. We should also keep eye on access and affordability, and finally we should not forget we need innovations, because they will bring us new solutions in our health problems. So thank you for this.
Thank you. So I have almost no time to round everything up, so I'm going to take 30 seconds to leave you with sort of 3 words that really stand out for me from what we've heard today. One that I hadn't expected, which is flexibility. We've learned flexibility from COVID. Let's see how we can better harness that going forward in building strategies, to build a strategy that is in itself flexible. The second word that really stands out for me from what I've heard today is collaboration, new models of collaborations, but also the need to really think about the depth of the supply chain. And I'm referring particularly to some of the things that Rex brought into the discussion. And the third word is one that I had expected, innovation. And that is innovation in a very wide sense, not only finding new molecules, but thinking about repurposing, thinking about new collaborations, as Thomas said, with working between the pharmaceutical sector and the medical device sector, but also, as Lorraine has said, really recognizing that we need to innovate in our workforce around this sector as well, that we need to think differently about that. I think it's been a really rich discussion. I appreciate the people who have stayed on over a little bit. There were a number of questions that we didn't get to. What the colleagues at the European Health Forum Gastein will do is we'll copy all those questions and we'll make sure that the speakers get the questions, so that if there's anybody who would like to answer questions, I'm sure they can be posted through the Gastein link. So with that, I'd like to close the session, to thank you all very much for being with us. Thank Lydie, who is with us in voice but not in image. Lorraine, Thomas, and Jay, thank you very much for having been with us, and to Rex in absentia. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Bye-bye.
Bye.